Security software firm Sophos let an OpenClaw agent run wild in an on-prem network just to see what it might do. Panelists, would you trust an AI agent to pen test your system?
Oh, 100%.
Maybe not. I guess it depends on the system.
No, I'm not gonna go that far.
Hello and welcome to Security Intelligence, IBM's weekly cybersecurity podcast where our expert panelists turn the biggest industry news stories into practical takeaways that you can use. I'm your host, Matt Kosinski, and joining me this week, as you've seen, we've got Claire Nuñez, Creative Director, IBM X-Force Cyber Range, Dave McGinnis, VP Senior Partner, Global Cyber Threat Management, and Kimmie Farrington, Security Detection Engineer. Today, we're going to be digging into cybersecurity in the age of instant software and the possibly uncontrollable growth of ransomware. But first, we have to keep talking about Sophos' experiment. Does OpenClaw make a good pen tester? Now, as you heard at the top of the episode, the red team over at Sophos recently ran an interesting experiment. They took an instance of the open source AI agent OpenClaw, told it to act like a red team operator, and let it loose in a legacy on-prem network. They were looking to test a thesis put forth recently by Ross McKercher, who also works at Sophos. He wrote, even the most risk-on organizations with deep AI and security experience will likely find it challenging to configure OpenClaw in a way that effectively mitigates the risk of compromise or data loss while still retaining any productivity value. And guess what? OpenClaw did a pretty good job. The team had to put some decent guardrails in place, but it did find 23 actionable high-quality findings, according to the report. Now, I'm thinking about this a lot, especially in the context of stories like Claude Mythos escaping its sandbox during testing, or even OpenClaw itself supposedly bullying a coder when they wouldn't accept its code. You know, once you set an agent on a path, it can be hard to predict its actions. And so, Dave, I want to start with you by asking, you know, when you look at what Sophos did with OpenClaw here, does this exercise teach us anything about how we can make AI agents into reliable security partners who don't go off the rails? What'd you take away from this one?
Of course, right? Like red team is an application thereof, right? So if we take this, right, like let's talk about what a red team is, right? Find vulnerability, ideally push and exploit that vulnerability. You know, someone's going to do it. They're either going to be paid to do it for the good side or they're going to do it for the bad side. So are we going to just let the attackers do it? Nah. Not going to happen, right? So the more that we lean into this, the more that we learn, the more that we figure out what it is, and don't pretend it's not coming. And this is for all jobs, not just security jobs, right? The better it's going to be, right? You got to try it out, right? And kind of figure out, like, this cat is not going back in the bag, right? We can't. The milk has been spilled. Picking an analogy, it doesn't matter. They all work, right? So my take on this is, thank you, Sophos, right? I love that you did that. We're doing some of that work ourselves, right? Like, we built a harness, we put it on top of, right? And we're running it with different models underneath to see, hey, is this better than my traditional scanning software? Is it better than my traditional pens? Like, what is it doing? Is the gap, right? Right now, there's a gap. And as Sophos talks about, it's 23. Like, okay, not horrible. What's it going to be like when we talk about the next topic, right? When we're having software generate all the time and it's less static and it's much more, transient, perhaps. We'll talk about that next, right? Like to me, yes, we have to lean in. It's exactly the right thing to go do so that we learn. And I thought Claire and Kimmie made great points in the open, right? Well, what controls do I want to put on it, right? Where do I want to stop the process of found hole? What do you want me to do about it? You want me to patch it? You want me to, what? Right. So we have to be doing more of this.
Absolutely. I like that because especially, recently there's been all this conversation around when should we use these powerful models? Who should use them? I mean, we had Claude Mythos come out. We had GPT 5.4 Cyber. So there's all this discussion about, who should have it, who shouldn't. And Dave, you're echoing something that a lot of other folks have said. Martin Keene and Jeff Kroom, when I talked to them about GPT 5.4, which is like, look, this stuff is coming, so we might as well get in there and start using it and figuring out how we can use it best. Because if we wait, if we sit around and try to, I wonder what's going to happen, the attackers are going to get it, they're going to use it, and then they'll beat us. And so it's like, it's a speed run, right? But I do also want to go back to, like you said, those guardrails, figuring out what guardrails you want to put in place. And Kimmie, I want to ask you about this, because something that came up during Sophos' experiment was, right, they were trying to make sure that OpenClaw could find flaws but not do any damage. And they figured that they figured out that putting these boundaries around it did introduce what they called some friction into the process, right? A quote from the piece is that the models we used regularly refused to cooperate due to concerns around malicious use. So it's like you got to put the guardrails in place, but then it can stop them from being productive. Do you have any thoughts on how we navigate this particular challenge of like just enough guardrails that they can still be useful? And any takes there, Kimmie?
I'll tell you, from a detection engineer's point of view, OpenClaw's a nightmare. And I can say that because as soon as it became available to the general public, all of our network administrators, anyone who has their own, administrative privileges on their box, went and downloaded a copy and started trying to use it. And then we realized, hold on, we weren't actually prepared for that. So then we had to figure out how to block it, and that's turned out to be an amazing nightmare because it has privileges and it's an agent that has been given privileges intentionally to go and do things for you. So how do you put those guardrails on? That's a really great question. This is one we've been grappling with, since the invention of AI, honestly, but certainly now OpenClaw has presented us with this massive attack surface, and we have to figure out how to keep it from running amok. I think a big part of it, like you said, is to get comfortable with the tool, understand what it does, how it does it, and then understand where the potential opportunities for it to go off the guardrails could be, right? This is going to be a learning experience for everyone. But like you said, if the attackers get comfortable with it first, they're the ones that set the pace for us. Then we're just spending all of our time chasing them and catching up, right? So, certainly encouraging everyone to use the tool, with human in the loop. So don't just let the thing go crazy. But like Dave started leaning into the next article about, the ephemeral software, that's going to be another nightmare.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of nightmares today, folks. But no,
Yes.
I think you're right, Kimmie, that like this is a situation where it's a learn by doing thing. And it's one of the things that I really like about Sophos' experiment was they were like, we're taking OpenClaw, we put it on an on-prem network, a legacy on-prem network, so it can't really touch anything cloud-based. It's kind of contained. We put some guardrails around it to see like what we need to do to make this thing operational. And I think that's the only way you can figure it out. I don't think you can theorize your way to this stuff. You just got to, like you and Dave have said, get in there, play with it, see what works in a safe way. And you also brought up, and I think I've quoted this like once per episode ever since you said it, Dave, and I'm going to say it again. Dave once said, AI agents are the most helpful insider threats we've ever had. Like, I just love it because it really encapsulates what we're up against, right? Like, they're amazingly powerful and also like super dangerous, and we're still figuring it out. Claire, I want to bring you in here because there's a takeaway from all of this that McKercher puts out there, which is basically that it taught him that cybersecurity teams are maybe better placed than anyone else to be at the forefront of AI adoption. I'm wondering if you agree, disagree, how do you feel about that take? What are your thoughts there?
It's such a loaded question, though, because I think about AI adoption and I think instantly that too many people are doing it too quickly and not putting the right safeguards in place, not testing it properly. But I do think that security has a really useful use case. It's not just asking, ChatGPT to make you a grocery list, something that you could fundamentally do yourself. It is actually very helpful in terms of, making security something that is maybe a little bit more tangible for organizations, because it is something that is expensive for organizations to implement and they don't always want to, which is not the right way to think of things. But that is how a lot of organizations think of things. I do think that security can definitely bring in AI in a way that makes sense to use, like in a way that makes sense, if that makes sense. Like you're using it for something that can actually look at those repeatable workflows and look for patterns and things like that. At the same time, though, I think there is a lot of nuance in what a human can do and look at. And I think that AI can't just be fully adopted as is for security. Like we obviously have to have a human still around and still kind of validating, still looking. Like, does it make pen testing maybe easier and faster and maybe lower cost and more tangible again for organizations? Sure. But I think you still need a human who can look at things in a non, one-dimensional way.
Absolutely. And I like that you kind of pointed out that one of the things that makes security so well positioned here is that like AI can help us solve real problems we have. Like for a very long time, for example, alerting and detection moved faster than a human being could, right? And like that's an amazing place where AI can help maybe step in. And so towards that end, I have to start wrapping us up for this segment, but I do want to throw to you, Dave, before we end it, which is that let's say a cybersecurity practitioner, an organization, they're sitting here, they're listening, they're going, you know what? I want to start bringing AI agents into my security workflows. Where do I start? What's the step I take first? I feel like you're the best position to answer this, Dave. So tell us, where do you start with this kind of thing if you want to explore it?
Quickly, great instincts to whoever's listening that's thinking that they should do that. Good idea, just like we said at the start, right? So you gotta get started. And I also really like what you and Claire were just talking about, that security is best positioned. We've always been overrun, right? Anyone who sat at a console and tried to keep up with events knows that, man, I'd really like an AI helper, right? Can someone do this stuff for me, right? And we've talked about it, at the other times I've been on, right? Is it vulnerabilities? Is it, right, bug bounties? Like we've talked about it in every single aspect of security, right? So is it helping me process changes and doing like a really robust risk review of, oh, hey, I'm going to make this change to my identity policy. Well, maybe I should run that past, I don't know, the rest of our security posture, right? Like, what is our ontology change if I do this, right? Firewall changes, and just kind of static access control, things like that. The threat program, if I can be so bold as to say, it's a target-rich environment, right? They're like everything we do in threat. We started with pen tests. We can talk about monitoring. We can talk about investigation, right? We can do all that. But and I think the point that you and Claire were on is that security is actually very used to this. Like we have two things. One, we live in a world that's completely overrun with data, and we can barely keep our heads up. So we want these tools more than anybody else. And we know what we want them to do. So the questions of guardrails and harnesses and things like that we've been talking about, we're good at. The other thing is, I'm going to say it nice, and then I'll say what we really are, right? Like we're really experienced looking for the holes, looking and questioning like, well, why does it need to have access to this and that? We're paranoid. That's the reason why, right? Like we live in a mindset that is like, well, wait a minute, hold on. Like, how can this hurt me, right? Like, what is it? Because that is what our job is, right? We're here to defend our organizations, in my case, right, through our services, our clients, right? That, I should say, all of our cases, our clients. And so, like, we've just, like, I've got 25 years of being paranoid and asking questions like, well, what about that? What about that? What about that? Right? And then I always know that there's somebody else that knows something else about somebody, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think the sum to sum all this stuff up is this is all what the good side does, right? This is the defensive side. We're protective and things like that. And we're talking about putting guardrails and harnesses on LLMs that people will have. So I'll leave you with this thought. How many LLMs exist in the dark web? How many live in open source that don't have guardrails or care about putting guardrails or will listen to us?
We're really continuing the nightmare theme, and we might keep continuing it. But I do. Before that abyss that you asked us to stare into, there's a lot of extremely good information and for folks to follow. So I'm gonna close out the segment on that note. But before I do, I just want to throw it to the viewers. If you're watching on YouTube, comments are open. If you're experimenting with AI agents in your security processes, tell us how you're doing it and how it's working out. Put that in the comments. But we got to move on to cybersecurity in the age of instant software. Now, Bruce Schneier, a man who probably needs no introduction in cybersecurity circles, published an essay by that same name, Cybersecurity in the Age of Instant Software, earlier this month in CSO Online, exploring how the rise of AI-coded instant ephemeral software might change patching and vulnerability hunting forever. I'm sure I won't do it justice, so I recommend that everybody go find this essay and read it. But the gist is AI is getting so good at writing code that we may be heading toward a world of instant software, apps basically spun up on demand, used a few times and then discarded when they're no longer needed. The pluses here would be that, if you've got bespoke code, attackers don't already know what vulnerabilities it has. The downsides here are that the vibe-coded bespoke code might be so full of holes, the attackers don't need to know what vulnerabilities it already has. So there's a little bit of a who knows, right? Kimmie, I want to ask you about this first because, look, you were talking about our last nightmare, OpenClaw, and you gestured towards this possibly being another nightmare. So again, as a security detection engineer, what are you thinking about this idea of ephemeral software and what it might mean for cybersecurity?
Ephemeral just means that there's going to be a whole lot more of it. They're not going to get rid of it. It's not going to spin back down. There's not going to be a deletion of the thing after they're done with it. Somebody's going to have them vibe code a thing. They're going to say, oh, I've got this cool tool. And then they're going to share it with all their friends. And then it's going to just continue to exist in whatever state that it came in, whether it's full of holes or not. I'm sorry if that's a defeatist attitude, but that is where it came from. That's immediate thought was like, oh no, this is even worse.
I think that's a really good point, though, because you're right. This assumes that we'll spin it up and then we'll spin it down. How much stuff do we already not spin down, right? Like how often are credentials and accounts just left sitting after people leave? And it's like if we're not getting rid of that, who's getting rid of the vibe coded ephemeral software, right?
I just don't see it personally.
I get that. And I'm seeing head shakes from Dave and Claire, or head nods rather, suggesting you folks agree. I think all of us are a little skeptical of the idea that the software is going to go away. Claire, I want to bring you in here. When you think about this ephemeral software that we possibly are dealing with, how does it change the human security hygiene practices side of things, right? We were just talking about people don't even properly dispose of accounts. What other practices do you think this is going to challenge us with when it comes to teaching good security hygiene?
I think there's going to be a serious graveyard of just dead vibe coded apps that someone was like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to try it and see what happens. I think the issue too is going to be some people will continue to use that in its original form and never use it again, and then maybe that's a vulnerable version versus a newer version. I think it's also just kind of what data are we putting in those applications, and what is then there's compliance risk there too if people are using kind of I guess shadow instant software. But I think it's I think it's just going to be there's going to be a lot of vulnerabilities. There's going to be a lot of just data living out there.
Yeah, Claire, I'm glad you bring up the idea of shadow ephemeral IT, because it's oh boy, could you ask for a worse combination? You know what I mean? And I didn't, honestly, when I first read this, I didn't even think about that angle, but you're right. This piece on the more optimistic side of things, this piece continues an idea we've seen crop up a lot recently, especially around Mythos and GPT 5.4 cyber, which is that as we develop these more and more powerful models and AIs and they get better at coding, maybe we can start inserting them earlier in the process to make shifting left in actual reality. We've talked about this for a long time, but a lot of people are saying, hey, look, if the AI is really good at coding, you stick it in there, maybe it catches more vulnerabilities than we did before, and now we have just less vulnerable code overall. Dave, I wanted to ask your thoughts here. Do you think that is a realistic view of how we can slot AI into the coding process and maybe use it to make up for some of its own shortcomings, basically, right? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, I think that's why we were all talking about Mythos, right? So, right? Wait, hold on, it can find stuff and then fix it? That's the
That's
that
the
sounds
goal,
cool.
man.
Yeah, the trouble is that on the other side of this, we don't call bugs, we call them vulnerabilities. And when you write code that uses them, we call them exploits. Just a thing, right? So we're back to the good and the bad, right? So it can't hurt, it can only help. Sorry. Talk about getting cut. Jeez.
Is that what you're going?
I'm not sure what I'm trying to say at this point.
It will help.
If we write better code, obviously, right? That has to be the thing. And I think that's the altruistic version of what all of them, right? Like Anthropic and OpenAI, right? Gemini, pick a model, doesn't matter, right? Those things are not trying to be bad tools. They're not. There are some other ones that are out there that are definitely trying to be bad tools, right? But the ones that have all the money and the things that are going to come first, at least so far, right? Are to help. I think the other part of this is we need the defenses, not just write better code, right? And completely agree with the premise of the article and what you guys have been chatting about. Like, yeah, it's going to happen. Of course, it's going to happen. And yes, hygiene's going to be. Come on, we don't do it now, right? So completely agree with everything you guys have said. So isn't the real answer we need always on, ambient, predictive, protective defenses? We can't respond with humans in the loop anymore, right? So we need to lean in. Like, this goes right back to the first comment. Like, would you use a pen tester? Yeah. I'd also use one to stare my identity. I'd also use one, right, all the way down the stack. So like, that's how you get to like this ambient, always on, fully autonomous defender, right? So like, well, wait a minute, I don't know what this thing is, but I have the ability to pause it, quarantine it, do whatever it may be before it hits users, data, other systems. It doesn't spread, because that capability is built into my whole, security ontology as an enterprise. That's hard, right? I know, we're working on it. It's a difficult thing, right? Because you've got the business challenges and they're wanting to go do different things, right? So cool. You've got their technology ecosystem, which is not just security things, right? And you need to bring all of that stuff together. Oh, not to mention they have partners, that third parties, they got all kinds of, right? Clients have, not that we don't, right? But like, clients have all kinds of challenges, and like, I need to be open, but I need to be secure. The only way we're going to solve this is with defensive AI that's running ambiently, that has a mindset shift of, I'm not here to react to it. I'm here to predict where it could potentially happen, prevent it from ever becoming a problem, right? Just completely reduce all of that through compensating controls, through code fixes like we were just talking about, whatever that might be, right? Always on, always rolling, right? And then what we get to do, and the challenge is like, we're going to have to keep bringing in the domain experience. And that could be from the business side, it could be from threat intel, it could be, right? Like, that's where humans, I think, are going to kind of go to this. I know you didn't ask that question, but someone is thinking about it. Like, did he just say there's no jobs for security? No, absolutely not. Right? It's just, we shouldn't be staring at screens. We shouldn't be trying to like, well, is this a good change that I should approve? No, we can build that in, right? Like, there's confidence, there's things that we can do. We need to operate at machine scale.
Now, I really like that. And I like that you also gestured towards, the kind of supply chain angle here, because part of what complicates things about this imagined world of like, ephemeral software is that there's, how we manage vulnerability detection for like spun up software someone made in-house versus like proprietary software where we don't have the access to the source code, but it's still in the supply chain. It's still part of it. Like, those are different things. And it's going to take a different approach. And I like how you kind of summed it up as like this always-on autonomous, basically, ecosystem that is looking at all this stuff and it's approaching these things, it's picking up on things, and then you bring that human in the loop for those decisions, like what do we do about vibe-coded software versus this proprietary software? Like, that is, I like that, and it's a really holistic picture of things. I have to wrap us up pretty soon, but to wrap up the segment, Kimmie, I just want to ask you, Dave has already kind of set the stage for like what he imagines we need to do to secure ephemeral software. But any thoughts you wanted to add there in terms of like, look, we're headed towards this future. Here are the things you need to start thinking about now. Any takes there?
That's a great question, but I really wanted to respond to the earlier question.
Go. Throw my question away. Respond to it.
Where in the process of security should we introduce the AI LLMs, right? And I wanted to just point out how ironic it is that we in the same conversation, we talked about how vibe coding is potentially full of holes and full of vulnerabilities, but we want AI to fix itself. So that's, again, this is where this mythos thing comes in. That's great. But at the same time, like, how come we can't just tell the vibe code to make it with secure code? Right? Like, why doesn't it just automatically make it secure? Why are there holes in vibe coded, AI created code? That part kind of blows my mind. Like, can't you just tell it as part of its guidelines? You know all the best practices for security, and when you write the code, it should have no holes. Can't we just do that? I mean,
I think that this gets to like Dave's point again about how like you can't take the people out, right? Because like at the end of the day, the people are telling you're prompting things, right? You're prompting the AI to write it, and especially we're talking about this future where like people are spinning up their own apps on the fly. You're talking about a bunch of people with no security background prompting a thing to code it, right? And it's like if our expert coders who know this stuff can't produce code with zero flaws. Of course, vibe coded stuff by a guy who's not an expert coder is also going to have flaws. And it's almost like I keep thinking of this idea of like defense in depth. And I feel like it really applies to AI especially because it's like you need an AI to watch your 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 AI. And it's like, I think that's just security, right? Like those layers are how it works. And now the difference is just there's an AI in some of those loops instead of just an IPS or something like that. We got to move on to our final story for today, folks. I really like that discussion though. This is ransomware growing 3 times faster than security spending. This comes from breach intelligence platform CipherCue, who reports a potentially troubling discrepancy between attackers and defenders here. According to an analysis of ransomware leak sites, CipherCue found that the number of claimed ransomware incidents increased by 30% between 2024 and 2025. They then compared this to Gartner's July 2025 spending forecast, which found that worldwide information security spending only increased 10% in that same time period. Now, CipherCue notes that this isn't like a perfect comparison, but I like how they contextualize it, right? Which is, quote, directional comparisons like this are how budget conversations start. If the observable threat is growing at 30% and the budget is growing at 10%, the gap compounds every year it persists. I think it's an interesting idea. Claire, I want to start with you. When you look at this, do you find this concerning? Are you like, there's a point to be made here? Or are you like, I don't know, Matt? Like, what's your take? What's your response here?
My initial thought when reading this was like, this is a confusing comparison of ransomware. Yeah, sure, ransomware claims are increasing. Okay, but spend is increasing only a little bit. I think it doesn't take into account like everything that organizations are doing for security, or past elements that organizations have taken into account for security, like past trainings and things. I think also just because something is increasing in the wild doesn't necessarily mean an extra spend needs to be taken. I think security in general, excuse me, is one of those things that organizations don't really want to have to spend money on. Like they know they should. They don't always want to. Unfortunately, we all know that here as security professionals. But I think it's one of those things that organizations don't want to like dump a ton of money into. But I don't think saying that just because ransomware claims have increased 30%, that spending should also increase 30% or something. I think it would be far more valuable to see like the efficacy of that spending. Like how efficient is that spending in those programs? That's a lot more difficult to track than spend itself. But I think just because you spend more doesn't mean that you have a better security posture in general. It comes down to your overall organization's security culture and everything as well. You can spend so much money on a tool or services and not do anything with that tool or those findings from different services or assessments. I mean, we see that a lot. I think we all see that a lot. Spend does not, like, you can spend $1,000 on a dress and it could still look really bad on you if you style it poorly. Like, it's so true though. You can spend a lot of money on something.
I really like this point that you're making, and I think it's a really important one, which is that like it's just because something is increasing in the wild doesn't mean the response is you spend more money on the thing, right? It's like how you spend the money and what it's doing is way more important than the sheer numbers, and I really like how you contextualize that, especially as we've been talking this whole episode about AI and how it's going to change things, and I think there's a real temptation for organizations to be like, buy the AI thing and then we're done. And it's like, that's not how it works. There's a whole, Dave has been laying it out for us steadily. There's a lot of work that goes into it. It's not set it and forget it. You know what I mean? So I really like how you're contextualizing that. Kimmie, I also saw you shaking your head. You're like, I don't really love this study. I want to see what are your thoughts on these numbers? What does it make you think of?
Claire has a great point. Right. The two things are not really compared to each other. This is a very difficult thing to say that one has anything or has any direct comparison to the other, right? Yes, sure. Companies don't really want to spend money on security. Got that. That's sort of been a baseline across the board, right? It's a spend on top of things, and they don't see really a huge return on investment, unfortunately. Ransomware, not everyone's been hit by ransomware, so they don't necessarily feel the bottom line effect, right? Not to say that they won't be, because as we have seen through history, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? Um, but this is why I say this is kind of a bogus study. Like, I'm like, it is a little it's disappointing to know that overall security spending has only gone up 10%, whereas we know that ransomware ask has gone up 30%, right? The attacks and whatnot. But I don't think that those two things are really relatable, not in the way that they tried to make them, right? you know?
It's interesting. Like, it's an interesting thing to see side by side for sure. And the way they're tracking the ransomware claim information, that's super interesting because not everybody is like, I was attacked and I paid a ransom. Most people aren't. So
Yeah, no, I think that you both point out some really important flaws here in how this is presented, while also like highlighting what we can take away from it. And so to kind of round us out for today, Dave, I'm going to pose the final question to you here, which is we've spent this segment really talking about, security spend and how we spend things is more important than sheer numbers. Any thoughts in terms of looking at this ransomware landscape? We're seeing things claims increase. We're seeing the number of ransomware groups increase as well. That was also in this report. Any thoughts on like where we should be putting our spend to deal with ransomware threats or any other takeaways from this, Dave?
Threats are there are more of them, right? I don't know if counting it matters anymore, but there's more of them than there are, right? It's never going to be in line anymore. So then you go like, all right, well, where do I go first? Well, you got to go to the things that the AI is kind of like ready to do. And even if you're still using it in assistant mode, which we've kind of crossed that as a generational thing, like we can get to some autonomous stuff, right? Right. And some of the things that we're doing with clients, right? Autonomous threat investigations, right? So no one's staring at a console waiting for the thing to go, right? We have AI. It's called Atom. More to find out later. But like what Atom does, and I don't mean to humanize the AI, and it's ATOM, so it does sound like a person's name. What it does, it's tier 1, tier 2, kind of getting ready for tier 3 in a classic SOC. Well, that's the biggest spend inside of threat ops. It's like we'd love to spend it on pen testing, we'd love to spend it on response and run books, but we don't. We have to watch all of these things and investigate all these things. Okay, AI, I got you. Come here. Right. So like that's a place where I would go. Right. So I would look at where AI is either doing it ideally, like in this case with Atom, but then also like where can you augment in a really meaningful way, be an assistant, right? Risk scoring. I might not reduce my spend there, but my quality has gone through the roof because I'm not making changes in my cloud environments or my identity policies without like really understanding what I've just done. Right. And so, I mean, to me, it's don't overcomplicate it. You do not need to go to pick a favorite planet, right? That we're not doing that. We just need to get off the ground, right? We can work on flying before we go to space. Okay. So, that terrible analogy. I'm just trying to top Claire's dress because that was really good.
That was a good one. That was a good one.
Yeah. Because I'm not going to look good in any dress. It's not going to matter. So I totally resonated with me, Claire. Thank you. But hopefully that point is dry. Like I think there's a tendency to say like, oh my gosh, AI can solve all of our problems. Settle. Hold on. Yeah, perhaps. But let's pick some things that you know and understand and that you can apply either in heavy assistant mode, but ideally more autonomously, right? Let it do its thing. And then work on how do I control that thing? How do I control the outputs? Change my business practices and processes to support that. And then I can pick the next thing, right? So to me, and what I spend all week with clients, thanks Frontier AI models.
Right.
Don't need to name them, right? But the advice and the conversations go with like, let's start somewhere that we know and we're a little bit more comfortable, right? And then we work on adjacencies. And I'll give you one quick example, right? So we'll start with threat, right? If I can bring autonomy into my threat investigations, the next thing I might want to do is say, we've never really watched, and this actually shows up in I think 2 of the articles we talked about already, identity. We don't really monitor threats in identity. We kind of like misuse and some other sorts of things, right? And we've always wanted to, right? So ITDR is a thing, and we've announced some services in and around that space. So that's a nice adjacency. And now I'm bridging into my identity program. My identity program probably is, if it's like most, there's lots of duct tape, chewing gum, paper clips, right? Lots of stuff, right? Even in the newly transformed, because it's complicated. You talked about the ecosystem, third-party vendors, partners, themselves, subsidiaries. Like, identity systems are really complicated to get just right. Well, maybe we can have some AI help us there. I'm not saying give it full autonomy, but maybe we can help, right? And so that's just a path to autonomy, right? Continuous controls governance can sit on top of all of this stuff, right? Like, how ready am I to be audited? That's not the question. How secure are you right now, right? That's what governance is supposed to be, right? So anyway, I have to cut myself off here, 'cause right? Like, I love this stuff, so.
We should just give you like a whole episode where you just get to just riff, I think we should. Unfortunately, that does it for this episode. It's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our panelists, Kimmie and Dave and Claire. Thank you to the viewers and the listeners. Thank you to our producers. Subscribe to Security Intelligence wherever podcasts are found so that you never miss an episode. Stay safe out there, and in Dave's words, don't overcomplicate things.